You can't possibly like getting a call from a telemarketer in the middle of dinner, do you?
I certainly don't, and as I pointed out, that's one of the things that makes it so frustrating both during the day and certainly at dinner time. But the question is, what should the FCC do about it? And unfortunately, the agency simply opened the door to class action lawsuits across the country, and that's not something that's going to benefit consumers.
Now, the FCC also voted today to expand subsidized broadband access to low-income households. This is something you also voted against. I don't get it. I mean, isn't the internet vital to everyone?
So a couple of different reasons why. First and foremost, the FCC refused to adopt fiscal responsibility reforms that have made the Lifeline program, as it's known, rife with waste, fraud, and abuse as it stands based on phone service. Secondly, in terms of expanding it to broadband, in my opinion, the FCC should be targeting these scarce funds on people who actually need it, people who don't have internet access. But instead, the agency has simply opened the door to subsidizing people who already have broadband, who have incomes much, much higher than the poverty threshold. And so it's not targeting these broadband funds where it's actually needed. And so for those two reasons, I took a different view from the majority.
So I also want to bring into this conversation Craig Moffett from New York. He's a partner and senior research analyst at MoffettNathanson. Craig, another major headline out of the FCC this week is this $100 million fine against AT&T for allegedly misleading consumers about unlimited data plans. Why do you think this is significant?
Well, it's significant for a couple of reasons. I mean, first, the number catches your eye. It's the largest fine that the FCC has ever issued. But I think it's important in the context of what it says about the role of the FCC, and I think this is something that Commissioner Pai has been a real spokesman for, and that is that we're seeing this creep of the FCC as being more and more and more interventionist. This is really a landmark in as much as this is getting at through what they call the transparency requirements, getting at broadband for the first time. And it's significant in the context of the implementation of the new so-called Title II rules around net neutrality.
Ajit, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my concerns with the particular AT&T case are a couple-fold. First, the 2010 rule that the FCC is applying here was completely rewritten in a way that nobody previously ever expected. Back in 2010, the FCC said that the rule was X. Now they're saying it's X plus Y plus Z. Secondly, the FCC completely ignored undisputed facts about what AT&T actually did. For example, it ignored the fact that AT&T had a nationwide press rollout about its network management practices, ignored the bill inserts that AT&T sent, ignored the 2 sets of text messages AT&T sent, ignored the fact that there were websites maintained for years to allow customers to get this information. And the FCC simply sweeps all this information under the rug in order to reach a headline in pulling a number from thin air, 100 million, simply to justify its existence, apparently, in this internet regulation space.
Now, Craig, you say that even though this Lifeline vote regarding broadband for low-income households isn't going to have a big impact on the telecoms or the internet service providers, there is another FCC program that will. Tell us about that.
Well, there are a number, right? So a related program is one in a recent vote that talks about deploying universal service funds for the extension of rural broadband. And you're just now starting to see the phone companies sign up for some of those funds so that they can bring broadband out to unserved areas. You're also seeing, to the extent that some of those funds remain unclaimed, you'll see cable operators starting to do that. I think that's part and parcel of the same impulse that is behind the Lifeline programs, which is trying to take a more governmentally interventionist role in trying to propel certain policies around closing the digital divide and bringing broadband to lower-income Americans or unserved Americans.
Now, Commissioner Pai, I want to talk to you a little bit about this potential tie-up between Comcast and T-Mobile. It seemed like it was going to happen, but then yesterday we learned that Comcast isn't even interested. I mean, is this because the FCC rejected the Comcast-Time Warner Cable merger? What's going on here?
Unfortunately, because that is a potential transaction that could come before me for review and ultimately approval or disapproval, I can't opine on the merits of it. And in terms of whether the deal actually will happen or not, that's something that I've simply been gleaning details about from the trade press myself. So unfortunately, I can't speak to it with any more authority than that.
Craig, what's your take on Comcast T-Mo? I mean, T-Mo seems to be thrown out there for so many different potential partners, right?
Yeah, T-Mobile is everybody's partner.
I mean, is this going to happen? So, A, is any partnership with T-Mobile going to happen, or B, is this Comcast thing going to happen specifically?
Well, look, I think remember that the context for this was that T-Mobile was reportedly in conversations with Dish Network about a possible tie-up. And I suspect what they're signaling is that they're not entirely happy with the prospect of Dish Network as their partner, and so they're looking around to see what alternatives are out there. It certainly makes sense to talk to Comcast. It certainly makes sense to consider whether a possible Sprint tie-up might be possible after the next election in the beginning of 2017, perhaps. Comcast would certainly be on that short list, but I don't think Comcast is a very likely partner, and part of it is because, having just gone through the regulatory process with Time Warner Cable, I can't imagine that Comcast would say now is the time that they want to start to do that again, in this case with T-Mobile.
Well, T-Mobile certainly seems to be interested in partnering with someone. Remains to be seen who that someone will be.